everyone, I thought I would sit and give you some film recommendations since we're all trying to pass the time at home. In the UK we've got a national lockdown, so the schools are closed to everyone except key workers, children. Loads of businesses are closed, you know, obviously things like restaurants and cinemas, and yeah, we're encouraged to work from home, and I know, you know, everyone's got various restrictions, so you know, everybody's been encouraged to stay at home, and we're all trying to find something to do. And I know that lots of people like us have kind of exhausted all the things they wanted to watch on Netflix and Amazon Prime and all that. So I thought I would sit and give you some film recommendations, because also, I don't know about anyone else, but when we sit down to try and pick a film, so for us, we're putting the kids to bed till about 9 o'clock at night, and then we tend to go to bed at 10 because we're up early. And so if we watch a film, or if we sort of invest in a series, a film might take us 2 or 3 nights to watch, because not only that, I fall asleep during them too. So tell me below if you sleep through films. So yeah, for us to pick a film, it's something that could end up being that we watch it for 3 days. So I find it really overwhelming if we're trying to pick something on Netflix and I don't really know if it's any good, and oh, I don't know, and if I end up having to watch this for days, and it just feels really overwhelming. And so yeah, I thought I would tell you some really great films that I really enjoy. Honestly, my original list was about 40 films. I've gone with 10. These aren't necessarily all my favourite films, and honestly, people who know me will probably be holding their head in their hands going, oh God, she's going to give film recommendations. So I used to work in an independent video shop. Remember video shops? I loved it. I worked there from when I was 13 till, I think the last time I worked there I was about 19 or 20, because I used to work there in holidays as well. And so we were allowed to watch films depending on the certificate while we were on shift. And also if we were actually busy. And we were allowed to take films home. So I used to watch everything. I used to watch all the new releases. I used to watch loads of old films. Yeah, I used to watch so many movies. And my taste back then was quite cheesy, and I really loved kind of cult films. And so films that I'll rave about that I loved back then when I was kind of into film are all kind of quite tacky 80s cheesy films. So yeah, I know people who will have heard me rant about films will probably think that my taste in films is dreadful. You're probably not wrong, to be fair. But I didn't want to recommend those kind of films, things like The Princess Bride, which I love, and Short Circuit 2, it's better than the first one. I wanted to recommend films that I would sit and watch right now if it was on, because those kind of films that I've watched thousands of times, and probably most of us have watched a lot, you know, I don't want to watch it again because I've seen it so many times I can quote the lines. I wanted to pick films that if they were on, I would say, oh yeah, I'll watch that with you, or films that kind of stayed with me in some way or meant something to me. So I ended up kind of ruling out loads of films just because I felt they were kind of overwatched, or I don't know. Basically, this isn't necessarily, the reason I'm calling this film recommendations and not my top 10 favourite films is because I don't know, other than probably the top like 2, what my favourite films are, because it depends. And would I watch my favourite films? Possibly not. That may seem strange, but there we are. So I've gone with 10 films that I have enjoyed. I've gone for a bit of a mixture. That was another thing, because I started off with quite a lot of old films, and I've wanted it to be a mixture of different kind of films, from different times, different themes. My taste tends to be a little bit arty, and also I don't like horror. I generally don't like anything nasty. Or, you know, anything that will make me feel anxious, or so that doesn't mean I only watch nice films, but I don't like really horrible things usually. Arguably, a couple of the ones in this list are. So that gives you a bit of an idea. So I'm going to tell you 10 films that I literally would watch right now if they were on and if my kids weren't in the house, because some of these are wildly inappropriate. I would love you to tell me some of your film recommendations so that next time me and my husband are sat there going, what do you want to watch? Oh, I don't know. That I can say, I do know, and go into my comments section. So in no particular order, let's start with this one. So The Favourite. This one, Olivia Colman won an Oscar for. Her speech is amazing if you haven't seen it. So I went and saw this at the cinema. Remember cinemas? I love going to the cinema. My mum, I think, had heard about it and kind of said, oh, do you want to go and see it? Because me and my mum used to go to the cinema. I remember these things. Yeah, so she was like, oh, do you want to see that film? And actually, I was really keen because I used to read a lot of Jean Plaidy books. If you haven't heard of her, she was quite an old historical fiction author. You don't come across her books very often. They're usually in charity shops or, you know, like a boot fair, and they're, you know, pennies because they're usually falling to bits because I'm pretty sure her books aren't in print anymore. But I really recommend them if you like monarchy historical fiction. They are so well researched. I know this because I'm a massive Tudors geek and her Tudor books are stonking. But yeah, so massive digression. Speaking's going well today. I'd read one of her books, which I think is called The Queen's Favourite, which is about Queen Anne, which is what The Favourite is about. And so I'd already read this book about it. I was quite interested because, you know, obviously it's unusual to get a story from history that is about women where that was so central to, you know, the politics of the time. So in The Favourite, you've got Queen Anne, who's quite a weak queen and quite easily influenced. And her right-hand woman is Lady Marlborough. And Lady Marlborough's, I think she's cousin, comes to court, and she's called Abigail. And the Queen is quite taken with her. And then there's this political interplay of trying to win the Queen's favours because then they can influence and have power. And it was, you know, very interesting. So The Favourite is all about that. But what's really great about The Favourite is it's not like a period drama. It's like the modern people, you know, it's got a lot of modern mannerisms and it's more imaginable on kind of how people really act, if that makes sense. Also, there's weird things like some of the costumes are denim and it's very, I mean, there's a lot of historical accuracy in there, but they've also really played with things and made it have an edgy feel to it. And it throws you all the time. It's very funny in parts. It's also very disturbing in parts. It also has an interesting theme of the sexual tensions between these women. And that, you know, there's no historical hard evidence for that, but there's, as far as I think I read about it, and there's like suggestions that it may have been the case, and that lends a whole new lens to that. So amazing. Olivia Colman is sensational in it. Yeah, it's very good. Even if you're not one for historical films, it's really good. My next one is one that my husband made me watch and I really enjoyed it, and it's What We Do in the Shadows, which is written and directed by Jermaine Clement, can't remember, who's the guy, one of the guys from Flight of the Conchords. If you haven't seen that series, it's very funny, I recommend it. And it's set in New Zealand, in Wellington, and it's a mockumentary. I do like a mockumentary, and it's about vampires. And it has that feel between the different vampires. There's one who's like hundreds of years old. They're from like different time periods. And it has that feel of almost like university roommates. And there's a lot of sort of uncomfortableness. And it's very funny because you've got kind of how people would act, but then, but they're vampires. There was also a series that span off from this set in Staten Island, which has Matt Berry and Tash Demetriou in, which is also very good. So, you know, try the series as well if you're more of a series person. It is obviously a bit gory because vampires, but it's very funny, and yeah, I liked it. Next one is a film I have actually not seen for a long time, but it really stuck with me, and it is City of God, which is a Brazilian film. Now, I watched this when I was in uni, so this must have been like 2003, 4, something like that I watched this film, and I went and saw it at an art house, and it was my first time going to an art house cinema, and I blooming loved it. So it was probably my first experience of world cinema. I'd seen some French films, but I don't think outside of that I've really seen very much. City of God is set in Rio de Janeiro in the slums, and it's about kind of the gang warfare between different gangs, and it's very beautiful but also really violent. So you have this real kind of, like, it's just a really amazing piece of cinematography, but also really thought-provoking. It really makes you see kind of the conditions and the violence that exists for some people, and yeah, quite affecting. It's based, I think, loosely on true events, I believe. But yeah, and one of the guys in it, who plays Knockout Ned, is in another film that I'll mention in a moment. So, next up is Shaun of the Dead. And Shaun of the Dead was a weird one for me because I do not watch horror at all. I once went to a Halloween party and they were watching Saw, and I just stared at the floor because no, not for me. And Shaun of the Dead is, and the weird one for me with Shaun of the Dead was that, so I'd seen it like around in the cinemas and people talking about it. I was like, no, I don't want to see that. And then my mum went to see it with my brother and then raved about it. And I was like, this is not your kind of film. Why? She was like, no, it's amazing. So I was like, all right. And eventually I got around to watching it and I loved it. Now, I grew up with Spaced, with Simon Pegg in it. And again, another amazing series if you haven't seen it. And so by extension then having him and Nick Frost in this film, and this is my favourite of the Cornetto trilogy. It's my favourite of their films, and it's very good. So Shaun breaks up with his girlfriend, or his girlfriend breaks up with him, and then he's kind of a bit of a waste of space, and he's got his friend, and then there's a zombie apocalypse, and it just kind of ends up with them, how they deal with this zombie apocalypse. It's really funny. Very kind of British humour. Again, a bit of a warning that there is a lot of, like, it's a bit gruesome, but yeah, not like, it's fine if you're not a horror film person. As somebody who's not a horror film person, I really like Shaun of the Dead. Next up is The Life Aquatic, which has got to be in my top 5 of all films, no matter how I look at it. The Life Aquatic is a Wes Anderson film. It's got Bill Murray in it and Angelica Houston and Willem Dafoe, and the guy, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Sue Jorge, I don't know. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say it. I've only seen it written down. And he plays like a musician who sings David Bowie songs in Portuguese, which I love and I have the album of. So in The Life Aquatic, it's a bit of a send-up of Jacques Cousteau, and so Bill Murray plays this character who is, you know, they make marine biology documentaries, and I have a degree in marine biology, so this film is like so up my street. And Bill Murray wants to find the jaguar shark that killed his best friend, and they go on this adventure, basically. It's, again, very funny, weird. It has the strangest kind of cinematography and weird humour. It's a very odd film, but in a really good way. If you've seen other Wes Anderson films, you know, I mean, they're all kind of like it. I like Moonrise Kingdom as well. But yeah, if you like marine biology and David Bowie, you'll like The Life Aquatic. Next up is probably the most recent film I have seen, and that is Parasite. And this is a South Korean film, and it's about a family who live in like a basement a basement apartment, a really run-down apartment in South Korea, and they want to have more, you know, more money, more with their life. And the son of the family manages to get a job as, or sort of lie his way into a job as a tutor for one of the children of this really wealthy family who live in like this huge house. And the rest of the family then kind of want in on it, and they lie and cheat their ways into all having roles within this, working for this family. And it's an amazing film. It centres a lot on like the contrast between rich and poor, and also sort of the architecture and like the house you live in has bearing on your life. And it's very clever, it's beautifully shot, the contrasts of it are amazing. And what I found very strange about this film is when it started off, I found it quite funny. It's quite kind of light and interesting and absorbing. It's a very long film, and it just gets darker. And by the end of the film, I was like, is this the same film? Because it changes so much. Very good. I found this film made me feel quite anxious, though, I will say that. I really enjoyed it, but because it's one of those that really gets under your skin, so yeah, depends how you feel about films, but you might find this one a bit much. Next up is Tonya. Now this one, I watched last year. I know it's been out a lot longer, and I'd wanted to watch it for ages, but I hadn't got around to it, and kind of nobody else wanted to watch it with me. But when I was a kid, I used to ice skate, probably from when I was about 7 till I was about 10 or 11, probably. And I was obsessed with it. I went and saw Torvill and Dean do a tour. I used to train at the same ice rink as Torvill and Dean, and I met them twice. I was obsessed. And during that time period was when there was the whole thing with Tonya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan, where Nancy Kerrigan was, so they were both in the Olympics, and Nancy Kerrigan was attacked with an iron bar. Someone hit her on the legs with an iron bar. And then it ended up that Tonya Harding had been involved in that. So I was interested in the film from that perspective, but actually, Tonya shows how, so typically ice skaters were quite wealthy, because actually ice skating is expensive, and kind of poised, kind of almost ballerina-esque kind of people. Tonya Harding was not like that at all. She had a very working class background, quite an abusive life. And her ice skating style was not that kind of poised, beautiful style. It was very aggressive, and she was the first American woman to land a triple axel. So, because she was so fast and so strong. And so the story in terms of her, just her life and it's just a very interesting story that led up to everything that went on around the Olympics that was like all over the news. So for me, because like massive nerd about this stuff, I really enjoyed it. But in terms of a sort of social story, it's really interesting, and the acting in it is amazing. Next up is a film I went to see at the cinema with my mum again, and this is Lion. And Lion, so I was listening to Radio 2 on the way to work, and I heard Chris Evans interviewing Nicole Kidman about this film, and they were both just sobbing. I thought it was so weird. They're both like, he was like, oh, in that bit where she was like, oh no, and they're both just crying their eyes out on the radio. And then I spoke to my mum, and I was like, oh, I heard this interview, and she was like, yeah, me too, let's go and see it. So Lion is about a little boy who, in India, and his brother takes him out to sort of work, and his brother leaves him in a train station and says, I'm just going to do a thing, I'll be back. And his brother doesn't come back. So the little boy, who's only like 4 or 5, tries to look for his brother, and he falls asleep on a train, and he ends up in, hundreds of miles away from his home, and he doesn't speak the language. he doesn't know the name of where he's from, or he does, but no one can understand him, and he can't read or write. He doesn't, and he's lost. And the whole concept of this lost little boy, and the idea like that, if that was one of my kids. And the thing is, if that was in England, then, you know, there'd be like a social media campaign, and it would be on the news, and the kid who ends up in like London and, you know, wherever you lived in the UK, I just don't think it'd be the same. But India is obviously huge. You know, there's language barriers, and just this kid who then ends up adopted in Australia. And is it Australia? Just suddenly thought it was not. I think it's Australia. He ends up, he wants to find where he came from. And this film is so beautiful. It's quite slow, but it's just this man trying to find where he came from, when, like, how can he possibly find where he came from? And it was one of those where at the end, I in fact, whenever I've been to see sad films, this was the first one where literally you could hear everyone, as the lights came up, just everyone was like, because it's amazing. The book is even better, but it's one of those, I actually read the book after the film, and I felt like I wasn't reading the book going, the film got it wrong. I read the book and it just like added to what was in the film. So I also recommend the book, but it's a very, very good film. Next up is Song of the Sea, and this film is gorgeous. This is so it's animated. It's got kind of an anime style, but it's not anime. It's made by an Irish film company, and it's basically a fairy tale. So it's a Selkie tale, so the people who turn into seals. And there's a little family, and there's a mum and a dad and a little boy, and the mum is pregnant and she dies in childbirth right at the beginning of the film. That's not spoilers. And then the little boy and the man are, you know, struggling to cope with not having the mum anymore. And the grandmother takes the little boy and the little girl in to the little girl who was born. And then basically a fairy tale happens. Now, the thing about this film is, if you watch this with your kids, my kids love this film, and to them it's a fairy tale with a Selkie in it, and it's got really cool music, and the animation is really lovely. But there is a deeper meaning inside the film that, as an adult, it's not like a difficult to spot one or anything, but as an adult, as you're watching it, you're like, oh, that's beautiful. Or I am anyway. When I watch it, I'm like, oh God, it's so like poignant. The film is about grief, and it's beautiful. So yeah, there's two levels to it. It's a cool fairy tale, or it is just this beautiful film. So I think it's very enjoyable by adults as well as children, but yeah, one that you can totally watch with your kids. And my last one, which I actually think is my favourite film in the world at the moment, so I thought I'd finish on it, is Whale Rider. Now, Whale Rider is a film from New Zealand, and it's about, a little girl is born. Amazing. Why should I not describe films? A little girl is born and her mother dies, and her twin. Brilliant. Well done. And so her grandfather is like a chief in the local area, and he wanted his son to have a son because his actual son is not that interested in all the cultural history. So he wanted him to have a son so he could like groom him to be the next chief. But the boy twin dies, the mother dies, the son is left grieving, and this little girl called Paikea is basically doesn't have anybody. And the son goes to live abroad. The grandfather isn't interested, and although the grandmother is, the little girl is basically kind of snubbed. She wasn't a boy, and so, but she loves all of her cultural heritage, and she's this incredible little girl, but nobody can see it. And her grandfather starts to try and kind of find a chief from amongst the local boys, and he's got this like school going, and she wants to learn, but she's a girl, so she's not allowed. It's a very slow moving film, but it's really stunning, and again the ending of it is just gorgeous. My kids watched this with me, and even my 8-year-old was fine. They found it beautiful, and they found it, they managed to watch it. I wasn't sure if they'd be able to sit through it, but they actually really enjoyed it. So yeah, all right to watch with kids. And it's got an amazing kind of feminist message, but it's about family, and it's about Wales, which is also why I love it, and it's beautiful scenery because it's shot in New Zealand, and just a really, I also really love themes of like grandparents and grandchildren, and so that kind of grandfather-granddaughter relationship is just stunning. So a really, really lovely film. So those are my 10 recommendations. Do let me know if you've watched any of them. What do you think? Leave me some recommendations below. I would love to have some from you. Hit like if you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos every week.